I've always believed that every home has a heart of warmth that comes from the people who live in it. My little two-story house had always been that way. The soft hum of the ceiling fan in the living room, the faint scent of lavender from the candles I lit every evening, and the old wooden rocking chair by the window that creaked when the wind shifted. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. After my husband passed 5 years ago, I filled the silence with little routines: watering the plants at sunrise, feeding the neighborhood birds, reading old paperbacks before bed. Life was quiet, almost peaceful, until the rainy evening I opened my door to a stranger. She stood on my porch, rain dripping from her hooded jacket, clutching a small worn-out suitcase as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. Her eyes were wide and red-rimmed, her breath forming little clouds in the cold air. "Are you Mrs. Parker?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Yes. Can I help you?" I replied cautiously, holding the door just enough to peek through. "My name's Lily," she said quickly, as if afraid the words might fail her if she waited too long. I used to know your husband. He helped my family years ago. I have nowhere else to go tonight." A dozen thoughts rushed through my mind. I hadn't heard anyone mention my husband in years, especially not someone I'd never seen before. I almost closed the door, but there was something in her eyes on exhaustion that looked deeper than just a long day. Against my better judgment, I stepped aside. "Come in before you freeze," I said. She hesitated for a second, then stepped in, leaving wet footprints on my doormat. I offered her a towel and watched as she wiped her face and set her suitcase down. The first thing I noticed was how young she seemed. Early 20s, maybe. Too young to carry such sadness in her eyes. She glanced around the living room, her gaze settling on the framed photos on the mantel. My wedding picture, a picture of my late husband with his fishing rod, a family reunion photo from years ago. "I remember him," she said softly, nodding toward my husband's picture. "He once fixed my dad's truck when we were stranded near the lake. We didn't have money, but he wouldn't take a dime. I never forgot that." I felt my chest tighten a little. That sounded exactly like something my husband would do. "So, what brings you here now?" I asked. She looked down at her hands, her fingers twisting the towel nervously. "I left home. I couldn't stay there anymore. I thought maybe you'd understand. I don't want to be a burden, just for a night or two, until I figure things out." Part of me wanted to say no. I had spent years building a fragile peace in this house, and I didn't want anything or anyone disturbing it. But another part of me, the part that still heard my husband's voice telling me to help when I couldn't send her back into the storm. "All right," I said, a little more firmly than I intended. "You can stay in the guest room for now. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." Her shoulders slumped with relief. "Thank you, Mrs. Parker. Really, I'll find work soon, and I'll pay you back for everything." I forced a small smile. "We'll talk about that later. You need rest tonight." I showed her to the small guest bedroom at the end of the hall. It hadn't been used in years, but it was tidy, fresh sheets, a small lamp on the nightstand, and a window overlooking the backyard. As she unpacked her single suitcase, I noticed there wasn't much inside: a few clothes, a paperback novel, a worn photo of an older couple, and a tiny box she didn't open. That night, as I lay in bed listening to the rain tapping on the roof, I couldn't shake a strange unease. Something about Lily didn't add up. Her story was thin. Her eyes carried secrets she wasn't telling, and though I told myself I was just being cautious, I couldn't ignore the feeling that I'd just opened my home and my life to something I didn't fully understand. The next morning, the sun broke through the clouds, casting soft light through the kitchen window. I made coffee and found Lily already awake, sitting at the table, staring out at the backyard. She jumped a little when I set a cup of coffee in front of her. "Rough night?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "Just a lot on my mind." I didn't press. Instead, we sipped coffee in silence. For the next few days, Lily helped around the house, sweeping floors, watering the plants, even fixing a leaky faucet I'd ignored for weeks. Slowly, my initial wariness softened. I started to think maybe I'd misjudged her. But then the little things began. A missing photo frame from the hallway. A drawer in my study slightly ajar, though I hadn't opened it. The back door left unlocked in the middle of the night. I brushed them off at first, telling myself I was imagining things. Still, the uneasy feeling from that first night lingered like a shadow in the corners of my home. One evening, while Lily was out for a walk, I wandered into the guest room to change the sheets. I don't know why I felt compelled to open her suitcase, but when I did, I found the small box she always kept hidden beneath her clothes. It was locked, of course, but it felt heavier than it should have been. I quickly shut the suitcase and walked away, scolding myself for snooping, but I couldn't ignore the weight of that box, not just in her suitcase, but in the growing list of questions that had no answers. And then, late one night, I woke to the faint sound of whispering outside my bedroom door. I sat up, heart pounding, straining to hear. The whispers stopped the moment I moved. When I opened the door, the hallway was empty. Lily's bedroom door was closed, and all I could hear was the distant ticking of the old grandfather clock downstairs. I told myself I was imagining things, but I knew I wasn't. Something about Lily's presence in my home felt wrong. I just didn't know yet how wrong I was. The next morning, I woke to the aroma of breakfast wafting from the kitchen: fresh toast, sizzling eggs, and the rich scent of coffee. For a fleeting moment, I felt as though life had shifted back to something warm and normal. Lily greeted me with a bright smile, wearing one of my old aprons over her faded jeans. "Good morning, Mrs. Parker," she said cheerfully. "I thought I'd cook us something nice." I nodded with a polite smile, though the events of last night lingered in the back of my mind like a shadow that refused to leave. I couldn't bring myself to mention the whispering I'd heard outside my door. Instead, I thanked her for breakfast and sat down at the table, noticing the neat arrangement of cutlery and the perfectly buttered toast. It struck me as odd that someone who claimed to have fled home with nothing seemed to have the habits of someone raised in a far more polished life. "Do you mind if I ask where you're from, Lily?" I finally said, taking a sip of coffee. She paused, her smile faltering for a split second before returning just as quickly. "A small town up north," she said. "Not much to talk about." "Do you have family there?" I asked carefully. Her eyes dropped to the plate in front of her. "Not really. My parents, they're gone. It's just me now." The way she said it, scum flat, rehearsed, made me wonder if there was more to the story. But I didn't push. People with wounds that deep rarely opened up when pressed. We ate the rest of breakfast in silence, though I couldn't help but notice the way her gaze occasionally flicked to the old clock on the wall, as if she were counting down to something unseen. As the days passed, Lily integrated herself into my home with an ease that should have been comforting but instead felt unsettling. She seemed to know exactly where everything was: the spare light bulbs in the hall closet, the key to the shed out back, even the code to the lock on my basement door, though I was sure I hadn't told her. I started to wonder whether she'd spent more time here in the past than she was letting on. One rainy afternoon, I was in the attic searching for an old photo album when I heard the creak of the front door below. Peeking through the slats of the attic staircase, I saw Lily coming in, her hair damp, holding a brown envelope tucked under her jacket. She moved quietly, glancing over her shoulder, before slipping into the guest room. Something about the way she cradled that envelope set my nerves on edge. I waited until she closed the door, before descending quietly and returning to my chores as if nothing had happened. But the image of that envelope wouldn't leave my mind. That night, after she went to bed, I tiptoed down the hall and listened at her door. I couldn't hear anything but the soft hum of her breathing. In the following days, new oddities began to pile up. A neighbor mentioned seeing a man standing across the street late at night, smoking and staring at my house. Another time, I found muddy footprints on the back porch, too large to be Lily's or mine. The sense of unease grew heavier, pressing in around me like a tightening grip. One evening, as I was sorting through some papers in my study, I found an old letter tucked inside a book, a letter I didn't remember putting there. The handwriting was unfamiliar, elegant, and precise. "Don't trust the girl. She's not who she says she is." My heart pounded as I read the single line over and over again. There was no signature, no date, nothing to suggest who might have written it or how it had ended up in my possession. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I glanced toward the guest room door down the hall, the shadows of the night stretching long across the floor. The next morning, determined to get answers, I asked Lily again about her past, about her parents, her hometown, her reasons for leaving. She stuck to the same vague story, her expression carefully neutral, but I caught a flicker of something in her eyes, panic, perhaps, or maybe guilt, before she looked away. That afternoon, I decided to take a walk into town to clear my head. On my way back, I stopped by the little antique shop near the square, where my husband and I used to buy old trinkets. The owner, Mr. Harris, greeted me warmly, and as we chatted, I casually mentioned the name Lily to see if it sparked any recognition. His face changed almost immediately, an unreadable mix of surprise and discomfort. "Lily, you mean the young woman who used to come by here a few years ago?" he asked, Yes, I said slowly. You know her. Mr. Harris hesitated before replying. I haven't seen her in a while. She was always polite, but let's just say she had a way of getting into people's lives. Sometimes folks said she asked too many questions about things that weren't her business. I felt a chill run down my spine. What kind of questions? He shrugged. Family histories, old deeds, things like that. She seemed curious about the past, especially about your late husband, if I recall. I left the shop feeling as though the ground beneath my feet had shifted. I walked home briskly, rain starting to drizzle again, my mind swirling with unanswered questions. When I returned, I found Lily sitting on the porch, her expression serene, as if she'd been waiting for me. You're soaked, she said with a smile. Come inside. I forced a smile of my own and stepped past her, my heart thudding as I wondered how much she already knew about me more than I knew about her. That much was certain. That night, the whispering returned, louder this time, accompanied by the sound of soft footsteps in the hallway. I lay still in bed, clutching the blanket, listening as the creaks in the old wooden floorboards seemed to draw closer to my door. When I finally gathered the courage to get up and look, the hallway was empty, but the guest room door was slightly ajar, a sliver of light spilling into the dark corridor. Something was happening in my home, and Lily was at the center of it. I knew I had to find out what, but the fear of discovering the truth was beginning to outweigh my curiosity. The following morning, I woke to the soft murmur of voices drifting up from the kitchen. The clock beside my bed read 5:30 a.m., too early for casual conversation. Pulling on my robe, I crept quietly to the top of the stairs, careful to avoid the squeaky step near the landing. The voices stopped abruptly, replaced by the clatter of dishes. I descended the stairs slowly, every nerve on edge, and found Lily standing by the sink, washing a single teacup. She turned when she heard me, her expression calm, but there was something about the way she quickly wiped her hands on a towel that made me feel as if she'd been caught up early again. I said, trying to keep my voice light. I couldn't sleep, she replied. Thought I'd make some tea. I glanced around the kitchen. There were 2 cups on the counter, one empty, one half full. I didn't ask about the second cup. I wasn't sure I wanted to know who she'd been talking to. Later that day, I decided I couldn't keep living under a cloud of questions. I went into the guest room while Lily was out on one of her evening walks. Her suitcase was still neatly tucked under the bed, but that locked box sat on the dresser, as if silently daring me to try to open it. I picked it up, feeling its surprising weight. There was no key in sight. I set the box back down, careful to place it exactly as I'd found it. My eyes wandered to the nightstand drawer, where I discovered a small notebook filled with handwriting that wasn't hers. Most of the pages were blank, but tucked in the middle was a torn newspaper clipping, a photo of my husband shaking hands with a man I didn't recognize, taken at a charity event years ago. Scrawled across the margin in pencil were the words, "Find out what he promised her." My stomach twisted. I sat down on the edge of the bed, staring at the faded photo. What promise? And who was her? The questions pressed in on me like a gathering storm that evening. I tried to act normal during dinner. Lily chatted lightly about the weather and the neighbor's garden, her tone cheerful, but I couldn't stop thinking about that note. Every smile she gave felt rehearsed, every glance weighed and measured. After dinner, as the rain tapped steadily against the windows, I excused myself and went upstairs to call my daughter, Emma, who lived 2 towns over. I hadn't told Emma much about Lily yet. Didn't want to worry her unnecessarily, but that night, I decided I needed another opinion. Mom, you sound uneasy, Emma said after I told her a brief version of the story. You barely know this girl. Maybe you should ask her to leave. I can't just throw her out into the street, I said. But something about her. I don't know. I feel like she's hiding something. Then trust your instincts, Emma replied firmly. If something feels wrong, it probably is. I promised Emma I'd be careful. Though that word felt hollow. The next day brought a heavy fog that clung to the house well into the afternoon. I was dusting the shelves in the living room when Lily's phone, left on the coffee table, buzzed with a new message. The screen lit up with a preview. We need to talk. She's starting to suspect. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't dare pick up the phone, afraid it might unlock with a touch. But the single line of text was enough to confirm what I'd feared. Lily was hiding something big, and she wasn't alone in it. I pretended not to notice when Lily returned and retrieved her phone casually, slipping it into her pocket as though nothing had happened. My mind raced all afternoon. Who was we? What were they plotting? That night, I stayed awake long after Lily's bedroom light went out. Around midnight, I heard the faint creak of floorboards again, followed by the sound of the back door opening. I tiptoed to the window in my room and peered outside. Through the drizzle, I saw Lily walking briskly down the driveway to the street, where a dark car idled with its headlights dimmed. She opened the passenger door, spoke to someone inside for several minutes, then returned to the house, carrying that same brown envelope I'd seen before. The sight of that quiet exchange under the veil of night sent a chill through me. I barely slept, my mind spinning with questions I couldn't answer. The following morning, I decided I needed to know more about the photo I'd found in the notebook. I drove to the local library and combed through the archives of old newspapers. After a few hours, I located the original article from which the photo had been clipped. It was a short piece about a fundraising event for a local children's shelter, organized by my husband and a woman named Margaret Ellis. According to the article, they'd raised money for a new wing at the shelter. Margaret Ellis. The name tugged at something in my memory, though I couldn't place it. I jotted it down and checked the shelter's records. To my surprise, I learned Margaret had passed away 3 years ago, not long after my husband. I also found a brief mention of a young girl named Lily in the same article, listed as one of the shelter's beneficiaries. A spark of realization flared in my mind. Could it be the same Lily? Was she that child from the shelter all those years ago? If so, why had she come to my home now, without warning or explanation? When I returned home that evening, Lily was in the garden, trimming the roses with a serene expression, as though she had no secrets at all. I watched her through the kitchen window for a long time before stepping outside. "Lily," I began carefully, "did you know a woman named Margaret Ellis?" Her hand froze midair, clippers poised over a rose stem. She turned to me slowly, her face blank but her eyes sharp. "Why do you ask?" she said softly. "I came across her name in some old papers," I said, keeping my tone casual. "She worked with my husband years ago." For a heartbeat, Lily said nothing. Then she smiled faintly, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I knew her," she admitted. "She was important to me." Before I could ask more, she excused herself, saying she had something to finish in her room. I watched her retreat inside, the roses forgotten, the clippers still in her hand. That night, I dreamt of shadows in the hallways and whispered voices calling my name. I woke drenched in sweat, my pulse hammering, the echo of Lily's unreadable smile haunting me in the dark. I woke up with a pounding headache the next morning, the remnants of uneasy dreams still clinging to me. The house was quiet. Normally by now I'd hear the faint clatter of dishes or Lily humming softly to herself in the kitchen. But that morning, the silence felt heavy, almost expectant. I got dressed and went downstairs, only to find the kitchen empty. A faint smell of damp earth drifted in from the back door, which stood ajar. I stepped outside, scanning the garden. Lily wasn't there either. The air was cool and damp, a thin mist hanging low over the lawn. I turned back inside, heart beginning to beat faster. On the dining table sat a folded piece of paper. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. Had to step out for a while. "Don't wait up." The note was short, but the lack of explanation felt deliberate. As if she wanted me to know she was gone, but not where or why. I tried to push down the unease gnawing at me and went about my morning routine. But every creak of the house made me jump. By afternoon, I couldn't stand sitting idle anymore. I decided to pay a visit to the shelter mentioned in the article, the one my husband had raised money for. When I arrived, I was greeted by an elderly receptionist who remembered Margaret Ellis fondly. "Margaret was like a second mother to many of the children here," she said warmly. "And your husband, he did so much good for this place. He and Margaret were very close." Her words made my stomach tighten. I hesitated before asking my next question. "Did you know a girl named Lily who grew up here?" The receptionist's eyes lit up. "Oh yes, sweet child, though quiet. Margaret was especially fond of her, took her under her wing. Poor thing had a rough start in life. I think Margaret wanted to adopt her, but the paperwork never went through before." Her voice trailed off, and she gave me a sympathetic smile. "Before Margaret passed." That revelation hit me like a blow. Lily hadn't just been a random guest who showed up at my door. She had ties to both Margaret and my husband. I left the shelter feeling as though I were carrying a lead weight in my chest. On the drive home, my mind replayed every interaction I'd had with Lily, looking for signs I'd missed, hints that she'd known me long before I'd ever met her. When I got home, dusk had settled over the house. Lily's shoes were by the door, and I heard faint movement upstairs. I forced myself to act normal and headed to the kitchen to start dinner. As I chopped vegetables, Lily appeared in the doorway. Her clothes were slightly damp, as if she'd been caught in the mist, and her hair clung to her temples. She smiled faintly, but I noticed a shadow of something else in her eyes. Wariness, maybe, or something darker. Sorry for disappearing earlier, she said lightly. Had some errands to run. Everything okay? I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. Everything's fine, she replied, though she avoided my gaze as she brushed past me to grab a glass of water. I didn't press further. Instead, we ate dinner, in near silence. The occasional clink of cutlery, the only sound between us. That night, unable to sleep, I decided to go for a glass of water. As I passed Lily's room, I noticed the door wasn't fully shut. A thin slice of light spilled into the hallway. I hesitated, then gently nudged the door open, a fraction more. Lily was sitting at the desk, her back to me, writing something in the notebook I'd seen before. The brown envelope lay open beside her, revealing what looked like old letters and faded photographs. One photo caught my eye. It was of my husband again, younger, standing beside Margaret and a small girl whose face was partially obscured by a balloon. I recognized the girl's dark, solemn eyes immediately. Lily, I pulled back quietly, careful not to make a sound, and returned to my room with my mind in turmoil. The next day, I resolved to confront her. But when morning came, I found myself hesitating again. There was still so much I didn't know. I needed the whole picture before I asked questions that might drive her away or worse, provoke her. Instead, I called Emma again. Mom, you're scaring me, she said after I told her about the photo. This isn't just some coincidence. That girl's connected to Dad somehow. You need to find out what she wants before things get out of hand. I will, I promised, though I wasn't sure how. That evening, the sky grew heavy with storm clouds. I found Lily sitting on the porch, staring into the distance as the wind picked up. Her expression was unreadable. Lily, I said softly, stepping outside, you never told me you knew my husband. Her head turned sharply toward me, eyes narrowing just a fraction before she masked it with a faint smile. I knew of him, she said. He helped the shelter a lot when I was a kid. I was just one of many faces in the crowd. But I could tell she was lying. The first drops of rain began to fall, pattering softly on the wooden steps. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The storm clouds rolled in overhead, dark and ominous, mirroring the tension between us. That night, as thunder rumbled in the distance, I dreamt of a locked box cracking open to reveal letters written in my husband's handwriting, letters addressed to Margaret, with promises I'd never known he made. I woke with a start, the echo of the dream clinging to me like a warning. I realized that the answers I sought were likely right under my own roof, hidden in Lily's belongings. The storm raged outside as I sat on the edge of my bed, wondering whether I had the courage to uncover the truth no matter what it turned out to be. The next morning dawned gray and windless, the storm having passed but leaving behind an eerie stillness. I walked through the house with a mug of coffee, feeling as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Lily was still asleep, or at least her door was closed, and no sounds came from her room. I couldn't shake the image of those letters I'd dreamt about, nor the memory of the photo I'd glimpsed in her envelope. That locked box in her room had begun to feel less like a harmless container and more like a barrier between me and the truth. I decided that if I was ever going to understand who Lily really was, I had to open it. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. Around mid-morning, Lily announced she was going out for groceries. The moment I heard the front door click shut, I sprang into action. I hurried upstairs to her room, the weight of what I was about to do pressing down on me, but unable to stop myself. The box sat where it always did, on top of the dresser, its surface smooth and cool beneath my fingers. I searched her drawers, her closet, the pockets of her jackets, hoping to find a key. Nothing. Finally, desperate, I checked beneath the lining of her suitcase. There it was, a tiny brass key taped to the underside. My heart hammered in my chest as I slid the key into the lock. It turned with a soft click. Inside were bundles of letters tied neatly with faded blue ribbons, a stack of old photographs, and a small velvet pouch. My fingers trembled as I untied one of the ribbons and unfolded the first letter. It was addressed to Margaret. Dear Margaret, I can never thank you enough for the work you've done for the shelter. I hope this donation helps the children, especially the little one with the dark eyes. You know the one I mean. She deserves a better life than the one she's had. The signature at the bottom made my breath catch. My husband's name. I rifled through the other letters, finding more of the same correspondence between my husband and Margaret, spanning several years. In one, he wrote about trying to secure funds for a scholarship for Lily. In another, he asked Margaret to look after her as if she were his own. But then came the letter that made my hands go cold. Margaret, there's something I need to tell you. I don't know how much longer I can keep this from my wife. She deserves to know, but I can't bear to hurt her. Lily is ours. You and I both know what that means. If anything happens to me, please see that she finds her way to the family she was meant to have. I sat frozen, my eyes glued to the words, ours. My husband had a secret child, a daughter with Margaret Ellis, and that daughter was Lily. The room tilted around me as I struggled to process the revelation. Lily wasn't just a stranger seeking shelter. She was my husband's daughter, my stepdaughter. The sound of the front door opening downstairs jolted me back to reality. In a panic, I shoved the letters back into the box, tied the ribbons hastily, and returned everything to its place just as I heard her footsteps on the stairs. I slipped out of her room and into the hallway, forcing myself to walk casually down the stairs as though I'd been in my own room all along. Back so soon? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. They didn't have what I needed, she replied, setting the grocery bag on the counter. Her expression was neutral, but I couldn't look at her without seeing the words of that letter burned into my mind. For the rest of the day, I avoided her as much as possible, retreating to the garden or to my study whenever she entered the room. But that evening, over dinner, she caught me staring at her. Is something wrong? She asked, tilting her head slightly. I shook my head quickly. Just tired, that's all. Her eyes lingered on me for a moment longer than felt comfortable, as though she could sense I was hiding something. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my thoughts a tangled knot of anger, grief, and confusion. My husband had kept this enormous secret from me all those years. And Lily, why hadn't she told me the truth when she arrived? Was she here out of a desire to connect with her father's family? Or was there something else she wanted, something she couldn't admit? The next day, I resolved to confront her. But when I went downstairs, I found her already sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, as if she'd been waiting for me. Good morning, she said softly, her tone gentle but unreadable. Morning, I replied, sitting opposite her. For a while, neither of us spoke. The tension between us was a living thing, thick in the air. Finally, I said, Lily, there's something I need to ask you. She looked up at me, her dark eyes steady. Go ahead. I hesitated, then said, you knew my husband well, didn't you? Her gaze didn't waver. I knew of him, she said again, using the same evasive phrasing as before. I found some letters, I said quietly, watching her reaction. Letters between him and Margaret Ellis. For the first time since she'd arrived, I saw her composure crack. Her eyes widened, and she set her cup down slowly. You went through my things, she said, her voice low but tight with emotion. I had too, I replied. You've been keeping secrets from me, Lily. I deserve to know who you really are. She looked down at her hands, silent for a long moment, then whispered, I didn't come here to hurt you. I just wanted to understand the man who was my father. The words hung in the air between us like a bell tolling in a church tower. I felt as though the ground had shifted beneath my feet. I had guessed the truth already, but hearing her say it aloud was something else entirely. You should have told me, I said finally, my voice breaking. I was afraid, she admitted. I didn't know how you'd react. I thought you might hate me for what he did. I didn't respond right away. My heart ached with a tangle of emotions: betrayal at my husband's secret, pity for the girl sitting across from me, anger at the years of lies. The storm that had passed the day before seemed to echo inside me now, gathering force once again. For a long while after Lily's confession, we sat in silence at the kitchen table. The rain had stopped outside, but droplets still clung to the window, refracting the muted afternoon light into small, shimmering fragments. I couldn't tear my gaze from her face, so familiar now that I knew the truth. Her eyes carried the same quiet determination my husband's once did, and that realization twisted the knife of grief even deeper. I cleared my throat at last. Why didn't you reach out sooner? All these years, I could have known you. I could have my voice cracked before I could finish. She folded her hands together, staring at them as if the answers were written there. I wasn't ready, she said softly. I didn't even know for certain until Margaret told me, not long before she died. After that, I guess I was angry. Angry at him for keeping me a secret. Angry at you for having the life I thought I should have had. But mostly, I was angry at myself for feeling that way. Her honesty disarmed me. I'd been expecting defensiveness, perhaps even resentment. Instead, I heard the ache of a girl who had carried her burden alone for too long. Anger is understandable, I said quietly, but showing up unannounced, hiding things that's no way to start fresh. She nodded, her eyes glistening. I know. I just thought, if I came here and stayed quietly, maybe I'd feel close to him somehow. I didn't want to ruin your memories of him. That last sentence struck me in a way I hadn't anticipated. My memories of my husband were already altered, fractured, but I saw now that Lily hadn't come to destroy them. She'd come because she, too, had been searching for pieces of him. Before I could reply, the sound of the doorbell startled us both. I frowned and went to answer it. Standing on the porch was a man in his mid-40s wearing a dark coat, holding a leather briefcase. "Mrs. Carter?" he asked politely. "Yet," I replied, uncertain. "I'm Daniel Harris. I was Margaret Ellis's attorney. I wonder if I might have a moment of your time, and perhaps of Lily's, if she's here." Lily appeared behind me, her face draining of color at the mention of Margaret's name. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "I've been trying to reach you for weeks," Daniel said gently. "There were some matters Margaret left unresolved before her passing. I only recently confirmed your address." I invited him inside, feeling a renewed tension coil in my stomach. We all sat in the living room, the soft ticking of the grandfather clock filling the heavy silence. Daniel opened his briefcase and withdrew a small envelope sealed with Margaret's initials. "Margaret left this letter for you, Lily, and there are some legal documents you'll want to see." With trembling hands, Lily broke the seal and unfolded the letter. Her eyes moved rapidly over the words, and as she read, tears welled up, spilling silently down her cheeks. "What does it say?" I asked gently when she didn't speak. She looked at me, her voice barely above a whisper. "She wrote that she always hoped I'd find you, that she believed I deserved a family, and that she regretted not telling you about me sooner. She said she trusted you to be kinder to me than she ever could have been to herself." A lump formed in my throat. Daniel cleared his throat softly. "Margaret also left behind a trust fund in Lily's name. It's not a fortune, but it's enough to cover her education or any future plans she might have. She wanted Lily to have a chance at a better life." The conversation that followed was subdued but surprisingly warm. I began to feel, for the first time, that perhaps there was a way forward, something more than secrets and resentment. After Daniel left, Lily and I stood together on the porch as the evening sun broke through the thinning clouds, casting a golden glow over the garden. "I didn't know Margaret did all that for me," Lily said quietly. "She must have loved you a great deal," I replied. For a brief moment, there was peace between us, fragile but real. That night, however, I couldn't sleep. Despite the revelations and the letter's comforting words, unease still lingered at the edges of my mind. There were things I still didn't understand. The late-night phone calls, the car that came to pick Lily up, the cryptic text message about me starting to suspect. The next morning, I decided it was time to ask. Over breakfast, as Lily stirred sugar into her tea, I said, "Lily, I believe you came here to find your father's memory. I believe that, but I still don't understand those messages on your phone. The one that said I was starting to suspect. Who was that from?" Her spoon clinked softly against the cup as she stopped stirring. For a moment, she didn't answer, her eyes fixed on the swirling tea. Finally, she said, "It was from a man who used to work at the shelter. He knew about my connection to your husband. He wanted to blackmail me, said he'd tell you everything before I had the chance to explain myself. I didn't want you to hear it from a stranger." "Is he still bothering you?" I asked sharply. She shook her head. "No. I told him to leave me alone. I blocked his number after that night." I wanted to believe her, and part of me did, but another part of me still wondered whether there were more layers to her story that I hadn't yet uncovered. That afternoon, Emma called, sensing something in my voice when I updated her about the new revelations. "You're handling this better than I thought you would," she said. "Are you okay, Mom?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I feel like I'm finally beginning to understand, but also like I'm standing on the edge of something I can't quite see." "Then take it one step at a time," Emma advised. "You've already come so far." That evening, Lily came to my room, hesitant, almost shy. "I know I've caused you pain," she said softly. "If you want me to leave, I will. I don't want to bring more turmoil into your life." I studied her face, the vulnerability there, and realized that despite everything, I didn't want her to go. "No," I said gently. "Your family now, whether we like it or not. We'll figure this out together." A faint smile broke through her solemn expression, and for the first time since her arrival, I felt as though a fragile bridge had been built between us. But as I lay in bed that night, listening to the gentle creak of the old house settling, I couldn't shake the feeling that there were still more truths, buried beneath the surface truths, that might yet come to light. In the following days, the tension in the house began to ease. Lily and I fell into a tentative routine. She would help me in the garden. I'd cook dinner for us both, and sometimes we'd sit on the porch in the evenings, sharing quiet stories about my husband. It was still strange to speak of him to the daughter I hadn't known existed, but there was also an odd comfort in it, as though some missing piece of him had been returned to me. Yet, even in that fragile piece, a question continued to gnaw at me. Why had Lily chosen that particular moment to appear in my life? Why not years earlier, or months after Margaret's death? Why then, one evening, as twilight settled over the garden and the scent of damp earth filled the air, I finally asked her, "Lily, when Margaret passed, you could have reached out to me right away. Why wait so long to come here?" She hesitated, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "I tried to," she said at last, "but I was scared. I thought you'd hate me then. A few months ago, I found something among Margaret's things that made me realize I couldn't wait any longer." My curiosity sharpened. "What did you find?" She rose silently and went upstairs, returning moments later with the velvet pouch I'd seen in the locked box. She handed it to me. Inside was a small, gold locket. I opened it carefully. One side held a photograph of my husband, younger and smiling. The other side, a tiny picture of an infant with bright eyes. "That's me," Lily said softly. "Margaret told me he gave her the locket before I was born. She said he wanted me to have it one day. I guess I felt like, if I didn't come find you now, I'd never get the chance." The sight of that locket stirred something deep in my chest, an ache for the husband I'd loved, for the secrets he'd carried, for the years Lily had grown up without him. "I wish he'd told me," I murmured. "We could have faced it all together." "So do I," Lily whispered. In that moment, I saw not a stranger who had appended my quiet life, but a young woman burdened by a history she hadn't chosen. The days that followed were calmer, but a lingering unease remained, like the stillness before another storm. It wasn't until a week later that the last thread of the mystery unraveled. A letter arrived in the mail, addressed to me in a familiar, looping script. My heart skipped a beat when I recognized it as my husband's handwriting. The envelope had been forwarded from an old office address, apparently lost in transit for years. My hands trembled as I opened it. "My dearest Anna, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And there are things I never had the courage to tell you. I hope you can forgive me. When I was younger, I made mistakes that led to Lily. She was never a mistake herself. She was a gift, though I didn't know how to bring her into our lives without hurting you. Margaret was kind enough to raise her, but I always intended to tell you one day. I was a coward for waiting. Please, if Lily ever finds her way to you, be the mother to her I never gave her the chance to have. She is as much a part of me as anything else I leave behind. With love, always." Thomas' tears blurred the words as I read them again and again. The letter didn't excuse his silence, but it gave me something I hadn't realized I needed: his blessing to embrace Lily, his plea for me to forgive. I found Lily in the garden later that afternoon, kneeling in the soil as she planted new roses. I handed her the letter without a word. She read it slowly, her lips pressed together, tears slipping down her cheeks. "He wanted us to be family," she said finally, her voice breaking. "And we still can be," I replied. For the first time since she had walked into my home, she smiled, a real, unguarded smile that softened every sharp edge of her face. As the weeks passed, the weight of unspoken secrets gradually lifted. Lily started volunteering at the shelter again, determined to honor Margaret's memory. I supported her however I could, feeling a quiet pride in the woman she was becoming. Emma visited often, cautious at first but soon warming to her half-sister. Watching the two of them laugh together in the living room one afternoon, I felt a peace I hadn't thought possible when this all began. But sometimes, late at night, I would still sit on the porch alone, listening to the rustle of the wind in the trees. I'd think of Tomasov, the man I'd loved, of the secrets he'd kept, of the daughter he'd left behind, and I'd wonder if, wherever he was, he knew that the family he had once fractured was somehow being stitched back together. The past had left its scars on all of us, but in the quiet glow of those evenings, I began to believe that healing was possible, that some wounds, though deep, could still close given enough time and truth. One evening, as the sky blazed orange with the setting sun, Lily came to sit beside me on the porch steps. "You know," she said thoughtfully, I used to think I didn't belong anywhere, but now, I feel like I do. I reached over and squeezed her hand gently. You always did. You just hadn't found your way home yet. We sat in silence as the last of the sunlight dipped below the horizon, two women bound not by choice but by fate, united by the love of the same man and the hope of starting anew. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel haunted by secrets. I felt, at last, at peace.